Yeah, with this we come to the third speaker of the fifth plenary session. And as we be prepared, I will ask the same question done for BVS. So Dr. S.W., called Eswe Jacobs, is an associate professor of geotechnical engineering in the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He graduated from the same university with a bachelor and bachelor and a master degrees, and then worked at Jones and Wagner Consulting Civil Engineering before leaving South Africa for going to the UK to study towards his PhD in geotechnical engineering at the University of Cambridge. His PhD research involved the investigation of the effects of tunneling near piled foundations by means of centrifuge modeling.
After his PhD students, Eswe worked for Arup on the Channel Tunnel Rail Link project in London. And then he did a postdoc research on the development of wireless displacement transducers for use in tunnels. He returned to South Africa in 2003 and first worked for Jones and Wagner again. And in 2010, he joined the University of Pretoria. 2 years later, he established a geotechnical centrifuge laboratory, the only centrifuge in Africa, he told me yesterday. His research interests are mostly in the field of unsaturated soil mechanics and include physical modeling of processes affecting the stability of tailing dams, sinkhole formation, the study of highly expensive clays, and the application of fiber optic technology as means of leak detection on water pipelines in unsaturated ground. In 2023, he was appointed by the South African Department of Water and Sanitation to lead the investigation into the geotechnical aspects of the 2022 Jagerfontein tailings dam failure in collaboration with the University of Witwatersrand. The same year, he established a mobile soils lab to undertake in situ triaxial and simple shear testing on sensitive tailing samples, avoiding sample disturbance associated with long-distance transport. The floor is for you, Eswe.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Suzanne and Jan, and thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. So I slightly modified the title of my presentation to modeling of the triggers of undrained instability in tailings dams. And what I'm going to present is aspects related to undrained instability of tailing slopes. I will review undrained instability, specifically looking at modeling triggers of undrained instability. Then I'll describe the centrifuge models with some observations and discussion conclusions. What I'm showing here is a Google Earth image of the Johannesburg area. There's a very small red dot on the locality map at the bottom where you can see the location. And all the white marks that you see, or blocks that you see in the figure, represent tailings dams. So over this area of approximately 70 kilometers, we've got a vast number of tailings dams. And all these tailings dams, or very many of them, are very close to built-up areas. And they have been around for many, many years. They started mining in 1886. So we've got a large number of tailings dams very close to a lot of built-up areas. And all these tailings dams currently stand. So they are at the moment behaving. What I want to do is zoom in. This is a photo that I took from the plane coming back from the previous physical modeling conference in Korea. So coming into land at Johannesburg Airport, you often see this very, very large tailings dam. It measures 4.1 kilometers in length, is 130 meters high at the moment. It is an upstream raised tailings dam. What is important to note here is that we have a pool on the dam that is relatively small. It is well contained in the middle of the dam, and we have relatively flat slopes. What I must also mention is we have a relatively dry climate in South Africa. Nearly all the dams that I showed you in the previous picture are upstream raised, And obviously, to change things on those dams to stabilize them is prohibitively costly. So we have to make these things work. So typical upstream tailings dam looks like that. So we've got the starter wall. Then people start, they usually construct a drain. These days, they will always construct a drain. Usually there's a layer, a liner system underneath today. And they then start filling up the dam, allowing it to dry properly. Then you use the dried material to raise the embankment, and there will be a pond far to the right, and you will have a zone that is saturated below that, and people thought initially dry above that, but it's partially saturated, so you still have unsaturated soil mechanics to consider there. So these dams are then raised by building them higher with the material that they are made from, which is a slurry when it arrives. And obviously, you need to do this very responsibly to not have big instability issues. So I'm sure all of you would have seen this very disconcerting video. What happens if things go wrong? So this happened in 2019 in Brazil. So we are reminded of the consequences of getting it wrong. If we do not manage these processes, you can get this very disastrous accident happening, and it cost the life of 270 people. So we need to deal with this very cautiously and carefully. So the causes of the failure that I've shown you are described or ascribed to different reasons by different people. So the one group proposed creep rupture of brittle tailings. So creep taking place, eventually breaking the bonds in the weakly cemented soils, in a combination with a reduction in suction over time due to rainfall aspects, that then they proposed resulted in this failure. What you did not probably see on the photo is they were busy installing piezometers using drilling involving water in the process down to 60 meters. If that column was full of water, that would exert a pressure of 600 kPa in the layers at the bottom where that piezometer was being installed. So 600 kPa in a dam with concerning stability may be a very real trigger. And the group in Barcelona is proposing this as a possible cause of the failure. The bottom line is that we observed a very dramatic liquefaction type failure, and that is why we are questioning drained instability. We need to understand drained instability. So traditionally, tailings dams have been designed using drained analysis. So this has a very large impact on the mining industry because we are now concerned about undrained instability of tailings dams. And tailings dam stability analysis, when you analyze stability undrained, show that numerous dams are potentially unstable. So the cost of remediating these structures are absolutely extreme. The most expensive batteries built in South Africa that I am aware of cost $80 million. $80 million cannot be afforded by every mining house. So the implications are really severe. So the financial feasibility or viability of our mining houses are in question, and they employ very many people with who will have no other income, basically. So we have to balance this impact of do we close down the mines by the financial constraints of what we are looking at, or are we what are we going to do? We can't risk the risk to life that we have seen that could be real. So we are really interested in understanding liquefaction, trying to model that in the centrifuge. But one thing that we must realize is you do not need liquefaction for a slope to become unstable under undrained conditions. We just need a reduction in the mobilizable strength, which could really happen. Typically, undrained strength is less than drain strength for the contractive materials we are often dealing with. And for you to see liquefaction, we need a contractive and a strain softening material. So, and importantly, undrained behavior requires some sort of a trigger. Now, after the disaster that I showed you, the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management was published, and they advocate for the identification and addressing of brittle failure modes with conservative design criteria independent of the trigger mechanism. So they don't really care about what the trigger mechanism is. They say you will design for undrained conditions. So we as academics find that somewhat unsatisfactory because we want to understand the mechanisms that can result in this undrained stability or instability. So I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about undrained instability. So factors controlling that, I'm showing a drained stress path, the black line, and an undrained triaxial stress path. And the undrained triaxial stress path turns to the left and it reaches a peak. So it's a slightly strain softening material. And if you do many of these tests, you can map those peaks, so you can fit a line through it. The reason why we are able to follow the stress path to the peak and beyond is because we are doing a displacement control test. Life is not displacement control, it is load control in a real tailings dam. So when you get to the undrained, what I call the instability locus there, you will see a brittle failure taking place, potentially brittle failure taking place, because strength is going to reduce with further strain being imposed. So there's this undrained, unstable zone. And a big question now is how close is our stress state in the dam to that unstable zone? So now we need to think about the ratio between horizontal and vertical stress. If we have isotropic conditions, then the stress state is far from the instability zone. It is basically on the floor where I'm showing it at the moment. And if you look at the shear stress strain relationship, the stress state is represented by the K equal to 1 value. So there's a lot of scope to handle shear strain, and to get you to the peak, you need to travel quite far. So if K naught is not equal to 1, if it is lesser than 1, which we believe it to typically be, because you are mobilizing shear stress in the walls of your tailings dams, then it brings you a lot closer to the apex of that stress strain curve. So the material is going to behave much more brittle than in the case if you have a K naught equal to sort of hydrostatic conditions. So K naught is an important factor. The horizontal, I should maybe not call it K naught, but the ratio between horizontal and vertical stress. So another aspect that is important is what is the shape or the direction of the stress path that we are imposing. I'm showing a triaxial extension stress path, which is bringing us to the instability locus much more directly than what a drained triaxial stress or a compression stress path would have done. There are other very important stress paths that we need to consider, like the constant shear drained stress path, which is going to be traveling from the right to the left in the diagram as water table rises, for example. A rising water table will cause the stress state to travel from right to left across the stream. And that is a real, an actual possibility in tailing slopes. So whether material contracts or dilates, I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the state parameter concept. If you have a state parameter which with a stress state represented in this area, so a fairly low void ratio, and you shear this material, it will dilate towards critical state. If it is on the other side of the critical state, it will contract towards critical state. So if you have a contractive material in your tailing slope, you will be concerned and you will be glad if you have a dilative slope. So the division between contractive and dilative is not really taken at the critical state line, but from experience, and I think it's Bean and Jeffries 2016 proposed using minus 0.05 as the cutoff. So more conservative. What else influences undrained shear strength? So this is well-known data by Verdugo. What I want to point out is we have the same material, Toyura sand, and we are looking at a void ratio of 0.86. If you change that void ratio to 0.88, you completely change the stress strain properties. Taking it 0.03 lower than that, you changed it completely. So we have extreme sensitivity to undrained shear strength from just changing the void ratio slightly. This is tailings that we investigated in our study, so gold tailings that we tested at our university. And you can see the extreme sensitivity to void ratio. I put the densities in there for interest sake. So if you want to do an analysis of a tailings dam stability and you have much variation in shear strength, in void ratio, it is difficult for you to analyze the undrained shear strength. So factors affecting the undrained shear strength include the state parameter, which is capturing the void ratio and the stress level. It is important to understand stress anisotropy, that comes into the problem. The fabric is important because it controls that instability locus that I've shown, which is not a material property. It depends on how the material is placed and other factors. So it also depends on the imposed stress path. So there's a complicated problem to analyze, and then the material that you're handling looks like that. So extreme heterogeneity, we have, you can see the scale there, that's 100 millimeters. You have several layers in there. So we have a problem on hand. So this is just another example where we dug out or pulled out a sample. So showing in a tube or a piston sample the variability in the material that we are dealing with. So we're sitting with a very difficult problem. So we find some guidance in the literature about what could constitute mechanisms of instability. So proposed triggers of undrained instability. There's overtopping, unloading, loss of support. And what I want to say at this stage is we excluded earthquakes or seismic or dynamic triggers from the work that we have done. We don't have an earthquake shaker, and South Africa is a low earthquake zone, not meaning that we don't get any seismic action, but we did not include that in our study. So the overtopping and the loss of support triggers are sort of two faces of the same coin, because overtopping would typically result in removal of material from the toe of a slope due to erosion, and you sit then with a loss of support. So all the stress paths associated with the different trigger mechanisms look a little bit like what I'm showing you there. So we've got the constant shear drain stress path, that one pointed there. If you increase the shear stress, maybe due to placing load somewhere, it looks like that. But all of them will drive us closer to the instability zone. So there are a few model studies in the literature studying tailings dams. There are many on slopes. So we read up on some of these and then started building slopes in the centrifuge that looked a bit like that. So we moist stamped the slopes to have a high void ratio, contractive fabric. We accelerated them to 30G, that's our scale. We then raised the water table on the right-hand side, and we allowed the water table to develop. Once developed sufficiently, we probed with the mini CPT so that we can compare between tests and show consistency. We then initiated the trigger and we monitored pore pressures, deformation, and in a few tests we placed a couple of total stress sensors. So the soil that we tested were a fine sand and a gold tailings, of which I'm showing the values there. So we wanted to test with fine sand, with gold tailings, because we thought that would act most undrained because it is finer and therefore give you the most dramatic failure. But it turned out that you actually don't get the most dramatic failure with the tailings, despite the fact that you can achieve undrained conditions more readily with the fine-grained material. But the sand, if you test it in a triaxial, is much more brittle. So if you look at the curves at the bottom, the sand is a more brittle material than the gold tailing. So we saw better responses in the slopes in silica sand. This is just a diagram showing the variation in state parameter in the slopes that we achieved. We wanted to have higher state parameters, more positive values, but the soil does what the soil wants to do, and it will settle to a value where it is comfortable, irrespective of what you want it to do. So during spin-up of the centrifuge, you get settlement, and when the water table developed, you get more settlement. But we ended off with a state parameter typically from minus 0.1 to 0.06. So still contractive nonetheless. This is just considering the pore fluid. So liquefaction, if you want to scale the event, you can maybe understand that there's two processes: the collapsible void space, the void space that needs to collapse, and then the dissipation of subsequent pore pressure, scaling with different quantities. And if you want to unify that, you can use a viscous pore fluid. So we used viscous pore fluids and we used a water glycerin mix. We had problems using methyl cellulose as it clogged up our models for reasons that I'm not going to go into now. So that is the fluid that we used. I'm going to show only two triggers, so a rising water table, a rapid buttress construction, but we also investigated loss of confinement at the toe, rapid surcharge placement at the crest, and then drilling the trigger proposed by the group from Barcelona, drilling with water and injecting pressure at the bottom of the slope. So rising water table, we are looking at the dilatant material, dilative material. So water table rising from the right-hand side, and you can see this progressive sloughing taking place, but never a catastrophic failure. So this is what we want. We want a dilative tailing slope, ideally. So I want to just advance that. Then I'm going to show you a contractive slope. So let's just get this to play. Okay, that's happening. So this is now at the verge of failure. There you go. So a fairly dramatic failure that took roughly half a second to develop without any warning prior to the failure taking place. And it only took place when the water table intersected the toe of the tailing slope. So this is some data from the observations. So we've got settlement at the top, 2, 3 LVDTs, and then pore pressure measurement. I want to point out that slight rise in pore pressure before the actual failure. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So we've got our LVDT readings. So settlement started to accelerate a little bit. As the settlement started to accelerate, we saw a little bit of a rise in pore pressure, about a meter of water pressure, 10 kPa. And then the failure initiated immediately a very dramatic drop in the pore pressure. And so then basically the failure was over and collapse occurred. So why this drop in pore pressure? It is not because of shearing of an apparently dilated soil, but it is because of the removal of material from the slope under partially drained conditions. So you remove a lot of material, dropping the total stress and the pore pressure. And we later confirmed that by fairly rudimentary total stress measurement to confirm that separately. So interesting also, you can tie the development of the various failure surfaces to the timing of the response of the small pore pressure measurements. So this happened when the drained factor of safety occurred, or was equal to 1, so 0.97, very close to 1. So that was for the first strip failure that was a very rudimentary drained analysis. I want to show you rapid buttress construction. So we had a hopper that we could open. Let's wait for that. There's the hopper opening, discharging sand at the toe, and you see that initiated failure, and the failure immediately propagated to affect the entire slope. So what we found is whether a slope with that trigger, whether it failed or not, was very sensitive on the position of the water table. The students got extremely depressed when we tried to trigger instability, because half the time nothing happened, which is of course also an important lesson to learn. So the failure could only be initiated when the drained factor of safety was very, very close to 1 in the cases that we have studied. So that is what I've said. Undrained behavior in the observations that we see were a consequence and not the cause of instability. But we need to question, let me just go through the typical observation of upon triggering. So we saw an immediate total stress redistribution that was from I called it rudimentary total stress measurement. We saw small positive pore pressures near the toe and in shear zones. And we saw that shearing of contractive soils, we only saw the pore pressure response in shear zones and not widespread throughout the saturated zones. The rapid reduction in total stress and pore pressure advanced under partially undrained conditions, basically unloading the slope, which explained that drop in pore pressure. An important point that we need to do, however, is to question the quality of the saturation in our models. How certain are we that we had properly saturated models? So we thought of all sorts of plans to improve the degree of saturation. So we de-aired the pore fluid immediately, shortly before the test, because if you leave the fluid for any significant amount of time, you quickly get air dissolving into it again. So we de-aired it immediately before the test. We then added a surfactant, which is basically the South African equivalent of fairy dishwashing liquid, appropriately called sunlight liquid, as a surfactant to the pore fluid. And then we also conducted the test under a CO2 atmosphere. So we then verified the degree of saturation after testing by making thin-walled brass cylinders that we pushed into the soil, and then we slid a plate underneath, this plate over the top, tried to accurately capture that volume and then go and measure the degree of saturation actually achieved. So this is just some pore pressure measurement throughout the test sequence. So we logged the installation of the tensiometers. You can see we measured about 10, 12 kPa. And then just before the test, while the model is already on the centrifuge, we applied a small partial vacuum and then filled the box with CO2. And we repeated it 5 times to try and flush out all the air that we could. And then during the test, we kept introducing CO2 and displacing any air or keeping any air, hopefully, out of the model. And then the test started, pore pressures rose as the water table established, and then the failure event eventually took place. And this is the result on a tailings slope, so gold tailings slope. We were very disappointed. It happened, so what you see is significantly sped up. We could not achieve a very dramatic failure, despite going to all this effort. So this is the least brittle material that we test, or the less brittle. The more brittle material looked like that. So got the water table establishing, also test duration about 2 hours in total. And the failure was more dramatic than previously. I'm just going to show you the failure event itself. That is sped up a bit. It happened over 3 seconds or something like that. So we did not see a very dramatic failure. But what I will get to that in a minute. Let's just show you limited data. Got some settlement taking place. The position of that red line is more or less where you can first see the settlement initiating and the pore pressure response subsequent to that. So the pore pressures did not initiate the failure. They were a consequence of the shearing. So then some results from our sampling where we took the cylinders, pushing it into the ground, trying to recover them very carefully and then going to weigh them, getting rid of the glycerin because glycerin does not evaporate. So there's a long story behind that. But the degrees of saturation, despite what we have tried, are not amazing. So you see at the water table and above the water table, fairly low degrees of saturation. Below the water table, a little bit better. But what you must also remember, as soon as you stop the centrifuge, capillary rise starts to dewater your model as the dry zones begin to suck up moisture from underneath. So it is very difficult to verify degree of saturation properly and to achieve degree of saturation. So sadly, we saw no noticeable difference from previous tests. So the observations from our centrifuge models is that slope failure only occurred when the factor of safety approached unity, despite our efforts to create a contractive fabric and to improve degree of saturation. So the undrained response in our models were consequences rather than causes of instability. We questioned the degree of saturation and went to the efforts mentioned to try to increase the degree of saturation. So important question maybe to listening to Mark yesterday is the effect of side friction. Do we really get the transfer of stress of self-weight to the soil to the degree that we need it? So sidewall friction is maybe an important aspect to consider. So the conclusions is achieving undrained instability in a centrifuge model. Should we have a more pervious or a more brittle material? So more pervious will give, or more impervious will give you a better chance of achieving undrained conditions. But it seems that the brittleness of the material actually more dominant in achieving proper brittle behavior or failure, more dramatic failure. So the sand failed more brittle than the tailings despite its higher permeability. So the liquefaction process is a threefold process. So the void space collapse, the subsequent dissipation of excess pore pressure, and subsequent to that, the post-flow, the post-failure outflow that takes place. And what we found is you can unify the first two problems or by using a viscous pore fluid, but that slowed down the post-failure flow. So we got more dramatic failures using water. So we still need to repeat the test that I've mentioned now with CO2 with water. We have not done that yet. The last test that I showed you was done literally 12 days ago. So the most rapid slow failure, as I said, was achieved using water. So we are yet to achieve undrained instability while the drained factor of safety is greater than 1. We have not been able to achieve that. The fact that we couldn't achieve it does not mean that it can't be done. So hopefully we will still be able to demonstrate instability in undrained instability and use the centrifuge as a tool to investigate this problem. So I want to, we can question whether a centrifuge is suitable for modeling undrained instability, but we haven't given up yet. So I want to thank my students, Arno and Arnold, for building all the models, and thank you very much for your attention.
As well.